To convey a sense of urgency, we originally designed Alex to nag the player pretty frequently. She'd say things like, "Hurry up and keep moving." Whether or not this created a sense of urgency is debatable, but after about 3 minutes of this, the one thing it definitely did was make the player hate Alex. This was one of the observations that eventually led us to switch Alex from generally leading the players to almost always following. Through playtesting, we discovered that players much preferred to set the pace themselves, and that they especially disliked virtually any hint of bossiness from Alex.
We populate our environments with spots where players can take a break to look out over an expanse of cool scenery. We call these vistas. This particular vista was designed to give anyone familiar with the Citadel interior from Half-Life 2 a good view of what it looks like now that everything's falling apart. The pods that are sliding off their track and into the abyss really sell the idea that the Citadel is half abandoned and in chaos.
In an early version of this map, Alex led the player through the whole thing. To make Alex seem less omniscient, we had her access a console here to get her bearings. It exploded, which helped drive home the point that the Citadel was in bad shape, but generally, it was a long pause in the action without a lot of payoff. After we made the high-level decision to have Alex follow the player, this entire scene became irrelevant, and we happily cut the whole thing. Training is one of the fundamental tenets of our design philosophy. Before the player is required to utilize some new game mechanic, or new weapon, or face a new monster under pressure in a dangerous situation, we always introduce the concept in a relatively calm, but ideally still entertaining way. This entire scene teaches the player that Alex can convert roller mines so that they can be used as a friendly weapon. Later, the player is required to do this in more pressing circumstances, but at this point, everything's still pretty calm. In the original design, the player retrieved the roller mine from a dispenser and used it to take out a combat soldier who was holding the field from the other side. Eventually, we scrapped that idea and combined the roller mine training with some stalker exposition that originally occurred in a separate scene.
In a good puzzle, the player is presented with an overall goal, and then faces a number of smaller challenges in pursuit of that goal. In the case of the stalker puzzle, we start with, how do I open the door? From there, we move to, how do I get to the stalker? Then, how do I get to the roller mines? How do I get the roller mine back to Alex? And finally, how do I use the roller mine to disable the stalker?
There it is. It's a lot more unstable, but it should last long enough to take out a few stalkers. Okay. We can get through now. Let's go.
We wanted to create an atmosphere of urgency in the Citadel, with Alex and the player focused on getting to the core to stop the impending collapse. Initially, we tried to reflect that urgency through Alex's behavior and acting. This proved to be unsustainable, however. If the player didn't choose to advance, Alex eventually ran out of lines or animations and was forced into her very non-urgent idle states. We found that the best approach was for Alex to have such implicit trust in and sympathy with the player that she's always content to proceed at whatever pace the player chooses. Once we adopted this principle, lines where Alex sounded impatient or frustrated with the pace of progress quickly stood out and were cut.
We created a new Citadel destruction set of broken Combine panels and prefabs for the interior spaces to help make the Citadel look like it was on the verge of exploding.
How are we gonna get through this?
We also introduced a strong ambient orange color to help sell the fact that the Citadel was in a much different state from the last time the player passed through. The orange atmosphere was justified due to all the fires and smoke inside the Citadel.
The primary goal of the first Citadel map is to communicate to players that the Citadel is falling apart. The Vortex was a late addition to the map, in an effort to beef up the idea that the Citadel was becoming a very dangerous place. We had particular difficulty in conveying the danger zone here. In early playtests, players thought that the entire bridge was dangerous at all times. Some additional effects work helped let players know where the dangerous areas were.
I'll be right behind you.
We would have loved to base more gameplay on this vortex idea, but we just didn't have the time.
We revealed the pod here to let players see it up close. At the same time, we didn't want players to get too good a look at what's inside. An old version of the scene had the pod simply hanging from the ceiling. It would burst open and then charge up your gravity gun, but not do much else. The current scene gives us a much more dramatic reveal of the pod, and an opportunity to introduce the mind blasts it's capable of emitting. Though they don't play a large role in Episode 1, these guys were a functional requirement of Episode 2, which meant we effectively had to ship a piece of that episode early.
We decided this space needed to look unique and appear to have more significance than the rest of the Citadel areas the player had already traveled through, while at the same time feeling as though it was still made with Combine technology. This room introduces a story point that plays a big role in Episode 2, so the player has to feel like something important is going on in here. A different fog setting, as well as different light styles and configurations, helped achieve this. The red lighting is a good contrast to the traditional blue-green colors of the Citadel.
Get out of here!
It's important that the player has some empathy for Alex, rather than seeing her as just a bullet-spitting robot. The brief recovery scene after the pod mind attack reminds the player that Alex is also affected by events in the world.
The light bridge ball sockets are a clear example of our training approach to new gameplay elements. We train the players with a leading example, confirm they understand the concept, then switch up the problem set and make them use it in a new way. The first bridge shows players the solution, the second one confirms they understand it, and the third, knowing they understand the gameplay mechanic, challenges them in a new way using that mechanism.
Nice.
Impending destruction is a recurring theme in the Citadel. From story, mood, and visual standpoints, this changes the Citadel. The destruction needed to feel natural rather than entirely scripted upon the player's actions. Not showing the destructive events dynamically makes the player assume the level of damage is static. However, if the events are too obviously triggered by player movement, the destruction feels too scripted. We found the solution was to give players glimpses of things that were happening at the periphery of the player space, as well as in their immediate vicinity, to give the feeling that stuff is happening whether the player is present or not. Having trained the player that balls fit into sockets, we wanted to introduce a puzzle where the question was how to get a ball into the socket. The puzzle we came up with involved a socket with an object blocking it, so that the player would have to ricochet a ball into place. This sounded simple until we actually tried to implement it. If we made the covering opaque, playtesters didn't realize that there was a socket behind it. When we made it translucent, they often didn't see it was there, and were confused when their shot bounced off. Making it movable was a red herring, making people think that they could actually knock it away. A couple of subtle art changes helped. We added some more prominent shadowing and made the glass panel flash when it was hit with a ball. Some playtesters consistently searched for a position to get a direct shot, which we didn't discourage as an alternate solution.
There are some little practical details that take a surprising amount of time and testing to get just right. For instance, it took us many playtests to figure out just how fast Alex should move. It turns out that her following behavior looks and feels the best when she's moving faster than the player's normal speed, but slower than the player's sprint speed.
This dropship scene was another case where we had to be clever about drawing the player's attention to something cool that was about to happen, which the player could easily miss if they weren't looking in the right direction. We used a solitary soldier firing at the player to draw their attention to where the dropship climbs into view. Once the player notices the dropship, there's a good chance they'll watch it until the payoff when it crashes.
This is where some player training pays off. After earlier training players on the use of ball sockets, they get a sort of live fire test here starting the elevator. This is the beginning of the level's puzzle arc, where a basic gameplay mechanic is made increasingly more complex by layering other puzzle elements on it. The first puzzle only requires that the player find a combine ball and put it in the socket. Here we're presenting the player with a now familiar ball socket challenge, but we're also bridging into some new training, showing the player that stalkers can destroy the combine energy balls.
Late in development, we changed the art for these doors so that players understood they were entering the core area. It turned out that having Alex talk about the area wasn't enough to give playtesters the sense that they'd finally arrived at the core.